The 1990s were a strange time for cinema. After the transitional period of the 60s, which went from historical epics and into the new Hollywood that would help define the 70s, and then the sheer balls-to-the-wall fun of the 80s, the 90s was a mishmash of indie cinema and huge breakthroughs in CGI. It gave us Groundhog Day, it bore witness to the birth of Quentin Tarantino as a superstar director, Steven Spielberg delivered two of the greatest blockbusters of all time, even Star Wars came back, but for every Pulp Fiction, Jurassic Park or Toy Story, there are movies that don't get the praise they deserve. Movies that were overlooked by audiences or wrongly dismissed by critics. Great, good, or just plain old interesting, they all deserve to be rated a lot higher than they are. I'm Josh from WhatCulture.com, and these are the 10 most underrated movies of the 90s. Number 10. Very Bad Things. Years before The Hangover made an improbable amount of money and inspired two lackluster sequels, Peter Berg made an even better, even darker film in the same vein. At the time of its release, Very Bad Things was considered too mean-spirited and too hollow to really work. People thought it was, a very bad thing. But that was precisely the point. The pitch-black comedy is a portrait of cold-blooded arrogance and moral redundancy, two features which would later form the very soul of Jules Gill, that spirals out of something as innocuous as a bachelor party. The cast is incredible, including Christian Slater, Cameron Diaz, Jon Favreau, and Jeremy Piven. And had it come out 15 years later, it would have been lauded as smart, dark, and funny. Instead, it wasn't Dumb and Dumber, so nobody cared. Number 9. Twin Peaks Fire Walk With Me. Twin Peaks Fire Walk With Me became a bigger punching bag than Michael Bay when it released in 1992. The TV show ended its immensely popular run on a cliffhanger, leaving fans to yearn for answers to the questions Season 2 posed. Questions which the follow-up feature film failed to answer in any shape or form, and then took a big old wee on you for asking them. Not only that, but the movie actively made the mythology even more fractured and abstract, all the while transforming the overall tone into something far nastier. Wacky asides and good old-fashioned police officers obsessed with coffee were replaced with torture and the corruption of youth, all played out against one of the most haunting environments David Lynch has ever produced, and that's saying something. As a pure horror film though, Fire Walk With Me is outstanding. Every Killer Bob appearance is enough to make you pop down your own legs, while imaginative scenes like one in a blisteringly loud nightclub where language is drowned out to the point where the story is advanced purely through subtitles creep you out by attacking the senses in ways few other genre movies are capable of. Number 8. Last Night. We've had no shortage of post-apocalyptic horror movies now that chronicle the final days before the end of the world and what you'd actually do if you knew everything was going to come crashing down. Personally, I'd grab the VR headset, the hairspray, and just go to town for 24 hours, but the underrated Last Night opted to tell a more melancholy, contemplative story about the final hours of a bunch of doomed characters. Worrying more about Y2J, no, not Chris Jericho, get back to the wrestling channel, the nuclear warheads, the film tapped into slightly different anxieties than similar flicks do now, making it a rather unique time capsule to revisit today. Also, it would take a few years, but it would go on to inspire the Strokes song of the very same name. I mean, that's almost definitely not true, but if it makes you want to watch it more, then yeah, that's what we're going with. Number 7. Exorcist III. You don't need me to tell you that The Exorcist is one of the best horror movies of all time, and you probably also don't need me to mention how its sequel was one of the biggest dumpster fires ever, and it deserves to be rocketed into an alternate dimension, but you might need to be reminded of just how good, how unfathomably good Exorcist III ended up being. Even though director William Peter Blatty warred with the studio over the state of the final cut, it still ended up pretty damn terrifying, mixing elements of the original supernatural spookfest with a more grounded crime thriller focus, basing the movie's Gemini murderer on the Zodiac Killer. Comparing it to the first is a little useless then, as while it shares similar DNA, it's a completely different beast at heart. Also, it has easily one of the best jump scares in cinema history, which an editor may or may not have spoiled whilst I've been talking, but still, the film is amazing, go and watch it. Number 6. The Addiction. Look, I know what you're thinking. You've seen the grainy black and white and thought, Josh, what's this wanky hipster bollocks you're going to pretend to like to look cool now? Bear with me, because The Addiction is more than worth your time. A vampire movie from the guy who directed the original Bad Lieutenant, you should already know from that description alone that the movie is going to be something pretty nasty and pretty weird. Following student Kathleen as she slowly succumbs to symptoms of vampirism, the film tackles her reliance on blood to continue to survive, but her reliance reluctance to indulge in the thing that's making her a monster. Of course, like all vampire movies, the flick works as an allegory, specifically for, you guessed it, drug addiction, but also more philosophical and religious concepts. It's a little on the nose, I'll give you that, but at the time especially, it was broaching rather controversial topics and still stands up as a damn fine vampire thriller. Also, it's 82 minutes, see? Not too arty-farty, yeah? Number 5. Copycat. Seen by many as the poorer cousin of contemporary serial killer classics like The Silence of the Lambs and Seven, Copycat is a stylish and taut thriller that has been unfairly left in the shadows. The plot is all about somebody recreating infamous murders carried out by historical serial killers. A copycat. I see what you did there, Hollywood. From the same brilliant minds who brought us The Commuter, I bet, which was, indeed, about a commuter. However, back to the plot, all of this bloodletting is seemingly for the benefit of celebrity criminologist Dr. Helen Hudson, played by the always brilliant Sigourney Weaver. Hudson suffers a traumatic episode early in the film though, which causes her to develop agoraphobia, oh my god, I've definitely mangled that, and withdraw from public life. Consequently, it's up to the brilliant Holly Hunter to figure out what's going on. It doesn't quite go to the dark places of Seven, and maybe that was its downfall at the time of release, but it is well worth a look, if only to see what the hell was happening in the mid-90s thriller boom. Number 4. Mystery Men. It's maybe not wholly correct to say that Mystery Men is an underrated movie in the classic sense, but there definitely needs to be a reframing of it as we approach its 20th anniversary. Let's recap for a second. Mystery Men combines a relatively large cast of superheroes, all of which parachute in from positions of relatively similar star power. Stiller is the big name, undoubtedly, but Macy, Azaria, Garofalo, Izzard, Rush, Kinnear, and Kel from Kenan and Kel are all immediately recognizable faces. Also, Paul Rubens is there. In a mere 2 hours, we get small slices of world building, with Captain Amazing being the big dick in Champion City, origin stories of various depth for most of our crew, and the standalone narrative about Casanova Frankenstein bending reality with his psycho fraculator. Sure. At the time, the lukewarm reception to the film was, yeah, sure, this is fine, but the most impressive thing is that it actually works. In 1999, this wasn't particularly big praise, but after a whole decade of team-up movies either requiring 18 standalone titles just to make sense, or spectacularly bombing with both the audience and the critics, Mystery Men deserves recognition for being way ahead of its time. Number 3. Ronan. The 90s wasn't exactly short on action dramas and thrillers, as mentioned earlier, and though Robert De Niro's most iconic film from that decade is often considered to be Heat, it's Ronan, directed by the formidable John Frankenheimer, that is perhaps his best. Given a contemporary setting and a cast comprised of former Cold Warriors, Ronan comes complete with plenty of action, suspense, and mystery. It also features just about the best car chase scene in modern cinema, featuring a Mercedes and a BMW speeding through the streets of Paris that must be seen to be believed. Trust me on this one. If there was one word to describe Ronan though, it would be authentic. Practical effects were the name of the game, and production was advised by a former member of the SAS. Throw in commendable performances from the entire cast, and Ronan more than deserves to be called one of the 90s most underrated gems. Number 2. Eyes Wide Shut. Even though it sits on a healthy 73% on Rotten Tomatoes, Stanley Kubrick's Eyes Wide Shut was considered to be a rather disappointing send-off for one of cinema's greatest directors. And while it may not be as trailblazing as the likes of 2001 or as A Clockwork Orange, it shouldn't be overlooked and stands toe-to-toe with so many of the filmmaker's other projects. Coming in at a whopping 2 hours 45 minutes, though the erotic drama is probably 2 hours longer than any film should be, and its winding narrative full of sex cults, hushed conversations between Tom Cruise and Nicole Kidman, and the collapse of reality itself is enough to test your patience. However, while it is easy to point at any one of these indulgent elements and rip it to pieces, as a whole they undeniably come together to create a moody drama all about excess and artificiality. Beyond all that wankery though, Eyes Wide Shut is simply a captivating watch, featuring some of the director's most striking imagery ever put to screen. It's long, perhaps unjustifiably so, but if you've been putting it off and have an afternoon spare and want to become one with your chair, you owe it to yourself to give it a go. Number 1. Last Action Hero. Considering how in love with itself Hollywood usually is, just look at how well movies about the industry tend to do come awards season if you don't believe me, it's odd how little John McTiernan's Last Action Hero seems to be recognised. Weirdly, the original version of the film was meant to be a parody of action flicks of the likes of Shane Black, with a loaded commentary on the futility of violence. But then, the studio decided they didn't want any of that and instead hired Black himself to rewrite the screenplay. So it became Shane Black riffing on Shane Black films, which does sound like the most Shane Black thing to ever Shane Black. That aside, the celebration of action flicks is hugely enjoyable, surprisingly clever, and delightfully nostalgic. Arnold Schwarzenegger is brilliant, Charles Dance is incredible, and it's basically an archetypal black movie, which is no bad thing, or the worst thing ever if you're an Iron Man fan. Either way, the fact that it sits on 37% on Rotten Tomatoes is a goddamn travesty.